part 6 of Reconfirmed. Now we're into another book. Remember last week we talked about Joshua and how he basically was the military genius that brought through and created them into the land of Canaan. And he also was able to take over and create what we see as Israel now. Today we go into the book of Judges and we learn about Gideon. Yes, Gideon, the guy that puts the Bibles in all the hotels. This is where the name came from, was Gideon. If you want to read about it, book of Judges 6 through 8. What happened was that once they got into the land, the Israelites started to mess up again. Generations passed since Joshua, and the Israelites did not, we annihilated everybody in Jericho, but we didn't annihilate everybody. In many cases, what they did, like the Amalekites and the Canaanites, they pushed them back. And in some areas, they even allowed them to stay, and they assimilated with them. They started doing some stuff that God didn't want them to do. Remember, God basically had these rules. He said, when you get to Canaan, don't worship any other gods. Just remember to take me with you. Remember to keep the faith and take me with you. Those were the main rules that he said. But time passes. The descendants of Joshua kind of died off. Generations changed. And God soon started to get forgotten again. This is going to take place about 1,000 years before Jesus Christ. What God did, because things were going the other way, we had Israelites that were they were marrying Canaanites. They were marrying Amalekites. They were mixing it up, and they were also mixing up their worship. They started to worship their gods. They started to kind of do their rituals. And so God created the judges. Judges were basically, they were multitasking people. They were people that would help solve arguments, as a judge does today. They were also, in a sense, the spiritual leader, kind of like a clergy of the town. In some cases, they were generals and would actually lead into war. One of the judges that did that best was actually a female. Her name was Deborah. And there's a song of Deborah in the Bible, and Deborah comes right before Gideon here. And she was a very get the task done kind of judge. She had no doubts. She just followed God, and she led them and pushed back some more people. See, what would happen is they would forget about God. In about 40 years, somebody would come in and they would basically overtake them. And then they would moan and grind for 40 years, and about the end of 40 years, they would say, God, please, we've turned our back on you. Please let us come back. And he would bring a judge that would kind of push the people back out, and they would live in peace for about 7 years, and then they would forget about God again. And some of the people would come back and annihilate them and rule them. And this was a continual cycle. You'll see that's a continual cycle. Every book of Judges, basically, every chapter kind of starts the same. The Israelites forgot about God. Somebody took over. They created this judge. Deborah was one of them that just came in and just kicked butt. She just kicked butt. She just moved everybody back. Everything was going well, and then she passed away. They forgot again. And so God creates Gideon. The problem with Gideon and Gideon's time is, again, they have really assimilated with the Amalekites, the Canaanites, and they are worshiping their gods. One of the gods is Baal. This is what Baal looks like. These are basically archaeological finds. We have things on the wall here. We've got different statues of him. Baal technically means any gods. It just means it's almost a plural for gods. But in this time, they're worshiping the god of the Canaanites, and they're also worshiping the gods of the Amorites. It was kind of the same gods. The biggest thing that this god is he is the god of fertility. He's the god of messing around. The other god is the Asherah pole. And that's actually, if we go back to the picture of Gideon, you'll see that that's what he's knocking down. Okay? This was again, a god of fertility. They were worshiping their own lust. It wasn't necessarily the god. They got caught up into their own lust. They didn't have TV at the time. They didn't have other things that we go for. They got into just the basic old-fashioned lust. And they, of course, followed the gods that gave them permission to do that. You see, our God doesn't. He wants us to behave ourselves a little bit. He doesn't mind once we're married. Then that's fantastic. But they weren't doing that. This was the God that brought in prostitutes. This is the God that brought in just do whatever makes you happy. Do whatever makes you happy. Baal actually sometimes represented a bull. Some of his images are bulls. Baal is the one that people would take infants, newborn children, and they would sacrifice him to Baal. They would go up to the altar and they would kill the baby. And then they would burn the baby as a sacrifice to Baal so that they could hang on to their lust. This is the kind of stuff that God, when people say, well, why can't other faiths, why is Jesus the only way? It's because of this, because God's saying you get misled. You start doing stuff that it's just not good for you. This is not good for you. To get so twisted that your lust, that the things that you just want are so important that you're willing to sacrifice the things that are dear to you. That's something you got to watch out for. What was dear to them at the time was their own kids. It's easy to say that's back then. Boy, were they nuts. But we have heard the phrase, do whatever makes you happy, many times. And a lot of us do. A lot of us have. So this is where Gideon is at. He's in this world where people are messing around and they're just doing whatever makes them happy. He's in the Las Vegas of Israel. God comes to him and he says, you're the next judge. And Gideon says basically the same thing that every biblical hero says, no way, I don't want this. But God reassures him, and he gives him some signs. He tells him that he's behind him, and Gideon even takes this fleece of lamb. It's kind of a lamb skin there. And he puts it outside, and he said, God, if you really love me, if you're really behind me, because I'm in the land where people don't want me to tell them what they don't want to hear. But if you're behind me, I will. If you're behind me, the next morning, let the dew fall everywhere except on that fleece. Show me that you can do that. And the next morning, of course, he came and found the fleece was dry. Then he says, well, now, for the next day, can you do the opposite? Can you put all the dew here and make the land dry? And the next day, God did that. He was able to actually wring out the fleece. It's okay when you're called by God to ask for reassurance in some way. It's okay to do that. Gideon proved that by asking multiple times, are you really there for me? Remember, we're jumping way ahead in the New Testament, John the Baptist actually asked, are you the true Messiah? It's okay to question that. God knows we're going to question that because he knows that we're flawed. What he doesn't like is when we do this kind of stuff where we're worshiping stuff. And so the first thing that he tells Gideon is, I want you to go basically to the town square where they had this big monument of this Baal where they were sacrificing their children to. And they had one of these poles here. And he said, I want you to destroy this stuff. I want you to get rid of it. So now Gideon's still a guy. He's still a normal guy. He still has those fears. So he said, okay, I'll do it, but I'm going to do it at night when everybody's asleep. I'm going to do it when I can't be caught. He gets his people. He's got kind of his employees. He grabs them, and at night they go and they bash it to the ground. Well, the next day, the followers of this are mad, and word travels, probably from one of the disgruntled employees, that it was Gideon that did this. They want blood. They go after him. They go to his door. His dad answers the door. His dad, who is a worshiper of Baal, even his own father. And they say, bring Gideon out. We want him because he destroyed our God. And his dad says something pretty prominent at that time. He said, if Baal is the God that everybody thinks he is, if Baal is truly the God that everybody thinks he is, then let Baal take it out on Gideon. Which causes them to pause because they're worshiping this God. And he hit a strong point there. He said, if he is a God, then yeah, he probably would be able to take him out. So they reluctantly just leave. They don't change. They just leave. And then Gideon is offered another task. He's offered the task to see at every time of harvest, the Amorites they weren't a big tribe. And when I say not a big tribe, I'm talking maybe the size of a population of Lincoln. Okay, there were a lot of people in these days, so that's not a huge army. They would camp out around Israel, and when their harvest came, they would come like a bunch of thugs and a bunch of bullies, and they would steal the harvest, and they would push people around, and then they would go back up and steal basically everything from the Israelites. Gideon was charged with moving them out, with running them off. And he was only given 300 guys to do it. And what they did was kind of a strategic plan. When you're outnumbered, you got to think with your head. The best thing to do is think with God. He told them basically, take a lamp, a torch, and put a clay pot over the lit torch. So basically, the light is kind of muted. And then they surrounded the camp area. And when they called out, they smashed the pots, lit the lamps. The Amalekites were so distracted by it, they thought a huge army was after them, and they even started killing each other because they were just confused. And he was able to draw them out. Now, the reason that we bring up Gideon, the reason that this is so important, and the reason why I just kind of buzzed through this story here, because the biggest story is not the army that he did. The biggest story is not him questioning God, which a lot of the people in the dramatics tell you about. The biggest story is him saying, no, I will not worship another God. That's the biggest story. When you're surrounded by people that do stuff that you know isn't okay, it's the hardest thing to say, no, I'm not going to do this. You know, it's very easy to be one of the people that goes along with people. And we're talking anything. We're talking, lustful behavior. But there's things that lead to lustful behavior too. There's me. I wants, or I deserves, or I needs. Those are the things that lead us to do things that maybe it's not okay to do. And God's not saying this because he's saying, I'm all that, so don't do that, because I just said don't do that, and I'm all that. Everything that God tells us not to do, those are things that cause us to destroy ourselves. You know, I know a lot of dads that work very hard at their job. They work very hard. And then they come home and they sit in front of the TV. Click, click, click. And their kids are wondering, Dad, will you spend some time with me? Click, click, All their energy is in their work to build stuff. But when it comes to actually being a dad, they become a little bit more selfish because they need that wind down time. Sometimes wind down time's fine. I don't want to give that. But sometimes we sacrifice our own kids for the things that in the long run don't matter as much. Now, I'm not saying quit your job. I'm saying balance it out. We do the same thing in our relationships with other people. We walk into relationships and we say, what's in it for me? Or you're not meeting my needs. Those are when we get caught up into this is not making me happy, and we start thinking about me, and suddenly the thing that we're worshiping is not God, it's the things that draw us from God. Remember, Baal is basically any god that takes you away from God. Let's just say that. So if we are worshiping finances, our TVs, ourselves, we're not worshiping God. There's moments when we step back and we think to ourselves, why have I gotten into this situation? Why is this relationship going bad? Why is this going bad? It's because the road that we took was not God's road. And we stand back and we think, what happened? Why am I in this mess? You know, I've talked about my book. My book that's chapter after chapter. Why am I in this mess? And it's because I did everything but follow what God wanted me to do. The Israelites did the same thing. As a matter of fact, in Judges 6, they cried out to the Lord because they were being annihilated again. And he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord of God of Israel says. It says, I brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I snatched you from the power of Egypt and from the hand of your oppressors. I drove them from before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship other gods." And his last line is a punch in the heart. He said, "But you did not listen to me." In other words, the reason that you're in this mess is because you did it yourselves. God's not a person that's just sitting there in a jar that we can take with us, and when we go to the bar or whatever and we want to trash talk our significant other and talk with the guys and get drunk and all that kind of stuff, and we screw that lid on, and we're fine. And then when we go home and we get into this fight with our family members and we wonder why our kids don't want anything to do with us, then we unscrew the bottle and we say, "God, okay, please help me now." And then the next day we screw that on again and we say, "Okay, I'm going to go flirt with this person that I work with. So God, just stay in the jar there." And then we wonder why our relationship isn't working again, and we unscrew that jar and we say, "Okay, God, I'm in trouble again. Why aren't you here?" And God's saying, "I am here. I've always been here. You're the one that keeps turning your back. You're the one that keeps putting the lid on the jar." There's times when we have to say, what is it in my life that stops me from worshiping? What is it in my life that I wouldn't want my pastor to know about? What is it in my life that I wouldn't want my spouse to know about? What is it in my life that prevents me from taking this worship home? What prevents me from being in church? This should be our second home. This is the place where we worship and we do fellowship. Now, granted, if you are unable to travel and you worship in other ways, that's fantastic. The idea is just to make sure that God's with you. If you're studying the Bible at home and you're practicing fellowship at home and you are honoring God and in an unselfish way, then that's fine. Church just kind of makes that more convenient for us because we gather together as disciples of Christ and we say, we're going to learn about this, we're going to learn what the Word is, and then we're going to take it out those doors. Because in truth, this isn't our church. In truth, this is God's church. And the first people that God say that it's for is the ones that haven't come in the door yet. And if we're representing ourselves outside of the church, then we're going to get more people inside the church. Right now, we're called bigots. We're called judgmental. We got a lot of things that we're fighting. This stigma, this reputation that Christians have. And it's because many of us have followed other gods that say, oh, it's okay to do that. It's okay to gossip about this person. And God's saying, no, it's not. When you're doing that, smash that God. When you're doing anything that takes you away from it, smash that God. Stop it, is what God is saying. And still keep me with you. Know that I'm here, because if you turn your back on me, you're going to get into some trouble. You bet God doesn't have enough faith in us to do it ourselves, because he knows us. And he knows as soon as we turn our back, we're going to go flying off somewhere else. We're going to be like a kid. We're going to put our hand on that burner. And we're going to learn, ouch, that hurts. And the first thing we're going to say is, God, where were you? And God was going to be saying, I was the one right there telling you not to put your hand on the burner. But you did it anyway. Those are the things that prevent us. Those are the things that stop us. These are the times when Gideon tells us things that we don't want to hear. These are the times that see, she's throwing a fit back there. So she's getting ready to stone me. I know it's going to happen. But it's times when I have to say things that we don't want to hear. You know, when I first came to Ord, I said that I would never say this, but when I first came to Ord, I was standing in front of the, where's the parking lot? Parking lot right there. I was getting into my car. I had been here for about a week, and there was a person that came up to me, and they said, how are you liking the church? And I said, I love it. It's fine. The people have been really nice. And she said, well, that's odd, because this is known as the bitter church in town. That sucks, doesn't it? That's the reputation? Now, I'll be the first to say, I never saw that, and I think that this person was doing a little stirring. But if one person even thinks that, ouch. That stinks. And it's been my goal to prove them wrong. And the only reason that the way that I've proved them wrong is that I've been listening. And I learned for myself, this is not the bitter church. This is a church that cares about people. This is a church that welcomed this guy that doesn't know anything about farming or anything, pretty much at all, and welcomed me. This is a church that does things for the needy, that is building the food pantry. This is a church that prays openly for people that they care about and welcomes people on the outside. But there's at least one person in town that thinks we're the bitter church. And that's one too many. And that's where God is saying, make sure that they see me. Could it have been that that person was sitting someplace when somebody was saying something bad about something? Could it have been that there was something going on where there was some argument or gossip going on? Or could it have been that they knew that one of our members was doing something that they shouldn't have been doing, or saw them in town doing something they shouldn't have been doing? Could it have been that? I don't know. It could have also been that this person just has a grudge, wanted to start a bad rumor. But like Gideon, this is where we have to say, we're going to spread God's news. And if we're not spreading God's news, we're going to keep our mouths shut. Because when we're worshiping the other things, the things that make us do what we want to do, that whatever makes us happy, the saying today is whatever makes you happy as long as it doesn't hurt other people. Well, guess what? When we do selfish things, it hurts other people. It hurts our family. It starts to dig at things. It starts to dig at our own souls. I'm not saying don't do whatever makes you happy. Because I'm saying that if you follow God, if you follow Christ, if you keep him in your heart, and if you treat every day as if God's right there, man, you're going to be happy. You're going to be more happy than you've ever been. Because you're going to know that there's a guy that you can lean on. You know that there's a guy that you're going to be able to give you hugs. There's a guy that's going to be saying, go for it. There's going to be a guy that's going to be saying, go down this road. Don't go down that road, even though it looks great. Go down this one, and you are going to be fine. People say, well, we don't hear God anymore, and miracles don't exist anymore. Yes, they do. It's just that we have become a bitter world. We have become the world that says, God, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? And if it's not in it for me, then God, I'm going to put you in the jar. I'm praying that like Gideon, we knock down those things and we bash those jars and we keep God with us all the time. Gideon had the rough task of telling an entire town what they didn't want to hear. Let's go out there and tell everybody what God wants them to hear. There is a reason why it's called good news. Because this was a sacrifice. They didn't even realize that they were hurting their own kids. They got so delusioned that they were killing infants. There's archaeological finds. There are people that said that's not true. And then in the last 20 years, they have found a burial ground in a cave full of infant bodies. Too many to count. And those infant bodies showed signs of blunt force trauma and burning. It can get that bad for us if we follow the wrong path. Ignoring our loved ones or choosing our will instead of God's will can lead us down to a delusion that sacrifices the things that we love. We may not put them on a block and burn them, but we're hurting them. And in the process, we're going to be hurting ourselves. Would you pray with me? Lord, this is one of those times when I kind of feel like Gideon. I feel like I'm telling people things that they don't want to hear. Lord, give us strength to hear the words that you want us to hear. Let us examine our lives and find out what are the things that are blocking us from taking you with us every day. Remind us that you are the all. You are the most important thing in our life. Without you, we are nothing. Give us the strength and the courage. And Lord, please give us your grace. In Jesus' name we pray.